What happens when raw aggression collides with unwavering discipline? On this fateful day, a group of reckless bikers would come face to face with a lesson they'd never forget. The wind howled through the streets. A warning whispered through the breeze. But little did they know, a force far greater than their fury awaited them. Saturday evening settled over a small park on the outskirts of Fairfield, Connecticut, the kind of evening where families lounged on picnic blankets, kids kicked around soccer balls, and teenagers sat on benches, earbuds in, scrolling through their phones. 16-year-old Ethan Carter was one of them. Leaning against the rough bark of a towering oak tree, he kept to himself, flipping through the pages of a book he'd brought along. His younger brother, Caleb, was just finishing up soccer practice, and Ethan had promised their mom he'd wait and walk him home. Dressed sharply in a fitted black suit, crisp white shirt, and polished dress shoes, Ethan stood out from the usual hoodie and sneakers crowd, but he didn't mind. He was used to being different. Then came the sound low, rumbling, and unmistakable. The roar of motorcycles sliced through the air, breaking the peaceful hum of the park. Normally, it was just background noise, a passing group of bikers making their way through town, their engines revving a little too loud for a quiet neighborhood like this. But tonight was different. The bikes didn't just pass through, they rolled in. 5 riders, clad in worn leather jackets and dark jeans, parked near the soccer field, their presence an immediate contrast to the easygoing families nearby. They weren't laughing, weren't chatting among themselves. Instead, they scanned the park, their gazes sharp and deliberate. And then they locked onto Ethan. He felt it instantly. A shift in the air. The way their eyes lingered on him, assessing, calculating. Ethan glanced up, meeting their stares for a brief second before looking back down at his book. He wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but something about the way they watched him sent a quiet warning through his gut. Something wasn't right. Ethan turned back to his book, forcing himself to stay calm. Ignore it. Focus. Breathe. But calm never lasts long when you're being watched. The bikers didn't linger by their motorcycles. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and a thick build, nudged his friend, then started walking toward Ethan. That's when the shift happened. Ethan felt the man's heavy footsteps before he saw him. The weight of each step against the gravel sent a quiet warning through his bones. He glanced up and found the burly biker closing in, flanked by 2 others, their faces unreadable, their movements deliberate. They weren't just passing through. They were coming straight for him. The rhythmic crunch of leather boots against gravel filled the space between them as they closed the distance. Ethan's pulse kicked up a notch, but his face remained impassive. His mom's voice echoed in his mind. Never let them see you sweat. Steadying himself, he dog-eared the page in his book and set it aside. What are you doing here, kid? The biker's voice was rough, edged with something unreadable. Ethan hesitated, his brows knitting slightly in confusion. What kind of question was that? Waiting for my brother, he replied, his tone even. Polite, but firm. The man smirked, glancing at his friends. This doesn't look like your kind of place. There it was. The weight behind his words, subtle but sharp, meant to cut. Ethan's jaw tensed, but he kept his composure. It's a public park, he said, meeting the biker's gaze without flinching. The smirk faded. Got a smart mouth, huh? The man stepped closer. The other 2 adjusted their stance, shifting subtly to form a loose semicircle around him. People were still scattered across the park, parents chatting, kids running, the occasional laughter drifting through the evening air. But no one was paying attention. No one noticed the slow tightening of tension beneath the old oak tree. Ethan flicked his gaze toward the soccer field. Caleb's practice was wrapping up. He needed to stay calm, stay in control. He wasn't scared. Not yet. But the situation was turning, and he could feel it. Years of karate training had sharpened Ethan's instincts: observe, anticipate, react. But he also knew discipline. Fighting wasn't the first option. It was the last. "Look," Ethan said, keeping his voice steady, measured. "I don't want any trouble. I'm just here for my brother." But the burly man didn't back off. Instead, he leaned in slightly too close. Close enough for Ethan to feel the man's breath, to catch the subtle hint of motor oil and cheap cigarettes clinging to his jacket. "Trouble?" The man's voice dipped lower, laced with mock amusement. Who said anything about trouble? Ethan felt the weight of their stares, the unspoken challenge in their posture. His hands rested loosely on his knees, relaxed but ready. And then came the words that confirmed what he already knew. "Maybe you should show us what you've got," the biker sneered. Behind him, his friends chuckled under their breath, their amusement sharp and knowing. But Ethan didn't move, didn't flinch. His hands stayed where they were, resting calmly on his knees, but his eyes stayed locked on the man in front of him. Years of training had taught him how to read people. The way their stance, their breathing, even the slightest twitch of a muscle could give away their intentions. And these men? They weren't here to talk. The burly man, clearly expecting Ethan to fold under the pressure, leaned in even further, his broad shadow casting over him. "What's the matter, kid? You scared?" he taunted. Ethan exhaled slowly, measured. He didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. Fear wasn't the issue. Time was. How long until Caleb's game ended? How long until someone in the park noticed what was going on? Leave him alone. The voice cut through the tension like a crack of lightning. Ethan turned his head slightly, just enough to see a small figure standing a few yards away. Caleb, his little brother, stood there, still flushed from the game, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Damn it! Caleb, stay back," Ethan warned, his voice firm. But the bikers had already shifted their attention. Their grins stretched wide, the kind of grin a predator wears when it spots an easier target. "This your brother?" One of them pointed a gloved finger at Caleb. "Maybe we should teach you both a lesson." Ethan felt his pulse quicken, not with fear, with resolve. He stood up, slowly, deliberately. Ethan's eyes never left them. He shifted his weight slightly, planting his feet in the stance, the same stance he had practiced thousands of times in the dojo. "Don't touch him." His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. The burly man laughed, shaking his head. "Look at this guy. Thinks he's tough." The others joined in, their laughter ringing through the park. But Ethan didn't waver, didn't blink, didn't even shift. And that silence unnerved them more than he realized. "You're not gonna do anything," one of the bikers scoffed, stepping closer. And that was when Ethan finally spoke. His voice was low, measured, deliberate. "You don't want to do this." The laughter stopped. For a moment, the bikers exchanged glances, caught off guard by the sheer confidence in his tone. But the moment didn't last. The burly man smirked and took another step forward. Then he raised a hand, going for a shove. What happened next was so fast, so unexpected, that even the bikers didn't see it coming. But Ethan did. The second the man's hand shot forward, aiming for Ethan's shoulder, he moved fluid, precise, instinctive. A subtle sidestep, his body shifting like a coiled spring releasing. The biker stumbled forward, caught off balance, but Ethan wasn't done. In one smooth motion, he stepped in fast. His open palm snapped against the man's wrist, twisting it sharply. A grunt of pain. The biker's hand dropped to his side, his face twisting in anger. "What the man started, but Ethan cut him off. "I warned you." His voice was calm, controlled, unshaken. The other two bikers didn't take the warning seriously. They rushed forward. The first threw a wild punch, sloppy, reckless. Ethan saw it coming before it even left the man's shoulder. He ducked, smooth, clean, effortless, then snap. A sharp, calculated kick to the man's knee. A cry of pain. The biker crumpled. The second one hesitated, a flicker of doubt. And that was all Ethan needed. Pivot, spinning kick. The heel of his foot smashed into the man's ribs. A gasp, air stolen from his lungs. The biker staggered back, arms clutching his side. By now, the burly leader had recovered. His face was red, veins pressing against his temples. Pure rage. He lunged, fists swinging like a street brawler. But Ethan didn't meet brute force with brute force. He stayed light, sharp, untouchable. Each punch missed a breath too slow. Ethan weaved between them, his agility honed from years of disciplined training. And then he noticed. The park had gone silent. A crowd had gathered. Parents, kids, soccer players frozen mid-game, watching. Someone had pulled out a phone, its lens capturing every second. And then, the leader charged again, but this time he wasn't throwing a punch. This time he was trying to grab him. The biker lunged, grabbing for Ethan's lapel, but he was too slow. Ethan twisted out of his grip with practiced ease, his body moving like water, controlled, sharp, precise, and then he struck. A direct, calculated hit to the solar plexus. The biker staggered back, his breath hitching, his tough exterior cracking under the weight of Ethan's control. This was over. Enough. Ethan's voice rang out across the park, steady, unwavering. His stance remained strong, his posture unshaken, but his face? No malice. No anger, only resolve. I don't want to hurt you. Walk away. For a moment, the bikers hesitated. The leader still clutched his chest, his breath shallow, glaring, calculating. The two others remained on the ground, one holding his knee, the other gripping his ribs. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. But Ethan didn't flinch, didn't blink. The leader's jaw tensed, his pride warring with reality. And then he broke. "Let's go," he growled, motioning to his crew. Muttering curses under their breath, they limped back to their bikes, their defeat heavy in their movements. Engines roared to life, but just as they began to pull away, the leader twisted in his seat, casting one last glare over his shoulder. His finger pointed straight at Ethan. "This ain't over, kid." The words hung in the air, a promise, a warning. Then they were gone. The rumble of their engines faded into the distance, swallowed by the night. Silence settled over the park. And then applause. It started small, a murmur, a ripple, and then it grew. People whispered in disbelief, admiration laced in their words. Ethan barely noticed, because suddenly Caleb was there. His little brother ran up, eyes wide, part fear, part awe. "Ethan, are you okay?" Caleb's voice trembled slightly. Ethan knelt down, resting a steady hand on his brother's shoulder. "I'm fine." He offered a small smile, reassuring, gentle. "Let's go home." And so they walked. Side by side, their footsteps soft against the pavement. But as the night stretched before them, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling creeping up his spine. A quiet whisper in the back of his mind. This wasn't over. Not yet. Caleb kept sneaking glances at his older brother, his expression a mix of awe and unease. He had just watched Ethan take on 3 grown men and win. Finally, he couldn't hold it in any longer. "Ethan," Caleb's voice was barely above a whisper. "How did you do all that? I mean, they were huge. And there were 3 of them." Ethan let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "It's not about being bigger, Caleb," he explained. "It's about being prepared, staying calm, knowing when to act." Caleb frowned, his young mind working through the answer. "But what if they come back?" he asked, his voice laced with uncertainty. "That guy said it wasn't over." Ethan stopped walking. Turning to face his little brother, he held his gaze. "If they do, we'll handle it." Then, his tone softened but turned serious. "But listen to me, Caleb. What happened today wasn't about fighting. It was about standing up for myself and for you." He paused, letting the words settle. "But violence? That's never the answer, not unless it's the only option." Caleb nodded slowly, absorbing his brother's words. Ethan placed a firm but gentle hand on his shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Remember, it's not about proving how strong you are. It's about knowing your worth. and never letting anyone take that away from you. The silence between them was full, not awkward, not empty, but understanding. By the time they reached home, their mother was waiting on the porch. Her arms were crossed, worry etched deep into her face. "You're late." Her voice carried that unmistakable mix of concern and authority, a tone only mothers could master. Ethan hesitated, glancing at Caleb, who stood quietly beside him. She already knew something had happened. The only question was, how much did she know? Ethan took a breath, choosing his words carefully. He didn't want to worry his mother more than necessary, but he also believed in honesty. As he recounted the events, he watched her expression shift. Fear, worry, and then something else. Pride. She listened intently, her lips pressed into a thin line, her hands resting on the porch railing. But her eyes, they glistened with emotion. When he finished, she exhaled, shaking her head slightly. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I'm proud of you for protecting Caleb, for standing up for yourself. But promise me one thing." She stepped closer, meeting his gaze. "Don't ever take risks like that unless you have no other choice." Ethan nodded. "I promise," and he meant it. That night, as he lay in bed, the night's events played on a loop in his mind. The aggression in the biker's stance, the whispers of the crowd, the warning in the leader's final words. "This ain't over, kid." But Ethan wasn't afraid. Fear only had power if you gave it power. Instead, he felt something else, a quiet, steady sense of purpose. The world wasn't always fair. But tonight had proved something. Courage mattered, discipline mattered. And standing up for what's right, no matter how daunting, is always worth it. Ethan's story is a testament to resilience, preparation, and knowing when to take a stand. His calm confidence in the face of adversity teaches us something vital. True strength isn't about size or intimidation. It's about knowing your worth and acting with integrity. If you found value in this message, like this video, share it with someone who could use a reminder of their own inner strength. And subscribe for more inspiring stories like this, because sometimes the quietest voices leave the strongest impact.